Josh and Frankie. What a couple of dumb shits.
Hello, Primates! You found Primus Tracks. Congratulations. There are other places to find Primus Tracks if you so desire, such as at Primus Tracks on Instagram and Threads. There's a Facebook page called Primus Tracks, of all things, and the email address is primustrackspod@gmail.com. I am one of the hosts of Primus Tracks, if you weren't familiar. My name is Josh, and the other host is coming to you from the 39th floor of Primus Tracks Towers in Mexico City. I believe if you hear any sounds of construction, it is because they are putting some additional stories on, and I believe they're going to be named Barrington Hall, but we can get confirmation from that guy. It's Frankie.
Hey, Josh.
Frankie, how's it going up there at the from your bird's eye view?
Absolutely fabulous.
Excellent. We are talking about Barrington Hall today. It is track number 7 on the Purple Onion record as we make our way through that one. We have help today. Frankie, we have a track of refinement, melody, harmony, a lot of stringed instruments, bowed instruments that you wouldn't normally hear on a Les Claypool penned tune. And so we had to call in our pal to help us make sense of all of it. He is sleep deprived, but he's here, and he's going to give it a go. Matt Hunter, welcome back to Primus Tracks.
Always a pleasure. Always glad to be on.
The fine primates are wondering, why did he describe Matt as lacking sleep?
Because he's now Matt Hunter, the father.
So, Matt, you've got a newborn at home. Because newborns are tiny, and so they don't take up too much space, but they're flailing around unless they're wrapped up, and they don't have the sense of balance yet. So I don't know if you're able to juggle child and bass in your lap at the same time yet.
Not often, no. I work from home, thankfully, so I get moments where I can reach my trusty bass or guitar, but when the child is around, it's all things revolve around him.
So baby is taking up more and more of your lap time, and those beautiful basses collect dust.
Unfortunately, yes, yeah. But it's all good.
It's a microcosm of parenting. You'll be all right. Well, congratulations to you and your spouse for having a baby boy in your lives now. It is great that you're here and have some time to talk about Barrington Hall. This is a bit of an unusual track throughout the entire Les Claypool and Primus discography. Barrington Hall, track number 7, checks in at 4 minutes, 17 seconds. The track is credited to Les Claypool on bass, vocals, and drums, Mike Dillon on marimba, Ben Barnes on violin, Sam Bass on viola and cello. And I have no clue about the live history of this one, Frankie.
Premiered on November 15, 2002 in Burlington at the Ira Allen Chapel, and played only 5 times in total. The last performance to date took place on December 31st, 2002 in San Francisco during a legendary Frog Brigade New Year's Eve show. Barrington did not return as part of the Frog Brigade 2023 celebrations. The song is incredibly special as it incorporates violin, viola, and cello, creating a really gorgeous concoction of melodies. Barrington Hall, by the way, was a Berkeley student housing cooperative. Primus played a number of concerts there during their early years. Parties were held at the place, which included LSD Spike Punch. Barrington served as a housing cooperative from 1935 to 1943 and 1950 to 1989. Complaints against Barrington started piling up in the early 1960s. One example from 1983 noted resident complaints not fit for habitability, live boa constrictor, fire, dried blood on the door, food and burning matches thrown at dinner, person wandering through halls, brandishing a whip and striking the walls with it. In the 1980s, the co-op was the focus of numerous accusations regarding drugs and noise. So this song is an ode to that fabulous place.
Yes. Safe to say Barrington Hall no longer functions as a student housing cooperative, and it is now under different management. But what a legendary place, and we'll get into more detail on that. I was shocked to hear, Frankie, that Barrington only has 5 live performances.
Only 5 live performances, and it's not surprising considering how complex it is in terms of instrumentation, right?
By the way, some other tunes that only have 5 live performances, and of course our stats are courtesy of Toasterland. Family and the Fishing Net, Ignorance is Bliss from Bernie Brains, God Bless America for some reason, Black Dog, I imagine that's the Zeppelin tune. So we're in Year of the Parrot territory here as far as performances go. I just had to...
Both Sam Bass and Ben Barnes used to make guest appearances for the live performances, for the lone 5 performances that we have.
So if they're not in the room, this tune is not being performed.
It is not happening. That's right.
Wow. Matt, I'm curious about this tune from a musical standpoint, of course, because it is fairly unusual, especially with the inclusion of violin, viola, and cello. But also, we're dealing with the fretless 4-string bass that is a part of the photography included in the album release. So a lot of people saw this fretless 4 and thought, ooh, interesting. And it makes this singular appearance that we know of in all of Claypool's work.
For all the reasons that have already been said, this is a really interesting and kind of special track. So we were sort of collectively racking our heads a little bit prior to recording. This bass is prominently featured in a lot of the Frog Brigade kind of photo shoot material. It's a really unique bass. It's the only 4-string fretless bass that I'm aware of in Les Claypool's bass collection off the top of my head. Mm-hmm. It's definitely the only Carl Thompson one, the only other fretless being the 6-string Rainbow. And it really doesn't feature a whole lot in Les Claypool's recorded or live material. We couldn't think of another tune that it has maybe been recorded on. Right. And in terms of live performances, I remember seeing it in some of the Bucket of Bernie Brains live perform, like the jam material, and I can't remember if that was on the 5 Gallons of Diesel DVD or if just my own YouTube perusings, but I've seen him use it in some of those jams. But and it also notably made a appearance in The Toys Go Winding Down on the Hallucinogenetics DVD. Which I think is also really special. I really love that rendition of that song with the fretless. I think it gives it a really cool tonality. But yeah, a rarely seen bass, probably only rarest next to the Antimatter, which actually got a lot of use around the anti-pop era. But otherwise, it's rarely seen the light of day. But it's a really cool bass, and it's a really cool tune, as you alluded to. There's, in terms of tonality, we'll be shocked to hear, I think this might be the only track that I have joined you guys for that does not prominently feature the tritone. This is a tritoneless jam here, and it's pretty much straight up C natural minor is pretty much the paintbrush that we're working with here.
Okay.
And it pretty much stays within that that kind of framework for most of the track, and then between the other instruments, you're exploring a lot of sort of third intervals for the harmonies.
Oh, okay.
So Sam Bass starting off playing, I think, in unison with Les in terms of the notes, and then transitioning to thirds in terms of the harmonies.
I did want to point out that this track sounds or has the feel of refinement. It, especially with those instruments that have been included and musicians that have been included, of course, but it with the playing within the natural minor and incorporating those thirds, it does have that air of some kind of classical music, I suppose. But it, and of course, that's so ironic contrasted with the subject matter of especially with what was going on in Barrington Hall in the 80s when Les was experiencing it. I do also want to give you the floor as you were getting started there to tell us what sets this apart from many other tunes with the lack of tritone and the inclusion of these harmonic thirds and that sort of thing. So what else are we dealing with here that makes this so unusual?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think the part of why it works or is really interesting is the contrast between the hedonistic source material and the sort of air of refinement that all the instrumentation and the arrangement has. It's also, I think, when I first heard this song, it kind of sounded a little bit like haunting in a way. It's almost like a haunted house kind of vibe to me. And maybe to some extent it is if it's a building that is, I don't know if it's abandoned or if it's just not used for that purposes anymore, but maybe the ghosts of all the folks who used to trounce around Barrington are kind of inhabiting the song. But it's a really interesting vibe.
Yeah, I'm buying that. And I think actually you're onto something there, because there's a specific part of the tune that I think is maybe conjuring that imagery. But please continue.
Yeah, and so I also hear there's elements of, you know, some of the other maybe darker sounding tonally, like Claypool tracks. I get maybe like echoes of like a Southbound Pachyderm or My Friend Fats or something like that in terms of just the kind of note choices that we're working with. But it's a pretty A-B song. There's not a whole lot of variation in terms of the structure, but the instrumentation and the arrangement kind of gets further and further embellishments as you go. And obviously Claypool's vocals get layered and more layered as the song goes as well. So there's just lots of different colors and kind of palettes that are kind of being worked within this fairly simple arrangement. So yeah, it starts off, as I said, in C, and we're playing a lot in kind of octaves and fifths with the intro. And he's doing a lot of the three finger technique.
Yeah.
Again, sort of like the Toys kind of thing. So we're going root to octave, fifth, root. And then going from the E flat up to the F there, the fifth again at the end. And that motif kind of comes back around in the solo section, but it's pretty much limited to the intro and then the solo section. And then we kind of get into the main sort of melody crux of the tune. We're going from C to E flat. Yeah, so E flat to D and kind of up to F, D. Yeah, going from C to E flat, F, D, B flat. We're playing a lot with that down a step from C to the B flat and then resolving to the C again.
Yeah.
Is what's happening a lot through the main melodies here. So. And he plays around a lot within that. So he almost rarely plays it the same way exactly. He'll play like a couple extra notes here or there, depending on what the vocal melody is doing, I think. It varies. So he's always kind of playing off of what the rest of the musicians are doing and what his vocals are doing. So he might go like...
Yeah.
Like he might do a little hammer on there to that note. And then he often will slide down on this... where are we at here? I believe it's the G. Yeah. So... and then it kind of goes into that main melody with Sam Bass. And I was mentioning earlier, with Sam Bass and also the other musicians who I had pulled up for reference here.
Oh, Ben Barnes and Mike D, yeah.
A lot of, Mike D, of course. Yeah, there's a lot of folks on the track. And I was a little surprised. Listening to this again today put me in mind of the Fungi Band. Because Sam Bass was in the Fungi Band. It feels like of any of his sort of different touring ensembles, that would have been the one, if they were to ever resurrect Barrington. Yeah, I would have expected it to maybe come out in that context, but unfortunately it didn't. But that's kind of what the other instrumentation is doing. And then eventually, I think it's Sam specifically on the cello. He plays in those third harmonies with Les. So to kind of illustrate those, I'm just going to go a little bit higher.
Yeah.
First try. All right.
Nicely
and so
done.
that's what's really interesting with that too, is like this is a very classic heavy metal move in a weird way. So like
Yeah.
Iron Maiden's harmonies are almost not entirely, but almost entirely like those harmonic third kind of intervals. So if you're listening to like the intro of The Trooper, for example,
Yes.
lots of harmonic thirds going on. Anytime there's more than one guitar playing a melody line in an Iron Maiden song, most of the times they're playing in thirds. So we're dealing with kind of the same toolbox, but the execution is obviously very different. And that's a lot of what's going on underneath the tune. And then if there's such a thing as a chorus of the just when I thought I'd seen it all, just when so he kind of walks it down from the G, E flat, F, E flat, D, B flat, and then kind of again the same resolution as we're using for most of the rest of the song. But otherwise than that, like I said, we go back to the intro part during the solo, and he's kind of just embellishing and kind of doing different things with those lines throughout. So it's, in terms of the bass instrumentation, it's playing a fairly supportive role, I would say. He's kind of letting the other musicians support the melody line and kind of embellish on it and harmonize with it in different ways and kind of create an atmosphere. You could see them easily embellishing in a jam kind of way live, because largely the structure kind of leaves a lot of open space for things to happen if you wanted things to kind of explore and expand out from there.
Yeah. So the other thing that comes to mind for me is the way that you're playing it dynamically. Then it's all finger picking, no thumping and plucking whatsoever, and the tonality of the fretless 4 just seems to lend itself to that more muted, classy approach, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly Les did a lot of slapping and thumping thumping and plucking. There we go. On the rainbow, and I feel like with the fretless 4, he might have done a little bit of that in the Bernie Brains kind of jams, but the fretless tonality, if in a more traditional sense, definitely lends itself to more softer kind of finger picked kind of lines. There's just a whole different tonality to sustaining a note on it than on a fretted bass, or even kind of sliding around like the when the line resolves and he goes, that the way that the note kind of falls off is just, it's so trademarked to that fretless sound. So it's an interesting palette to work with. It brings out different things, I'm sure, creatively for him as well.
And that is, I think, the hallmark of Purple Onion, when we look at it as a whole, is exploring those different opportunities and areas and essentially trying something new and taking those creative risks. It's funny because I wouldn't use this word to describe the record, but I think I saw it on some metadata as far as a genre, and it was labeled experimental. And I thought, I saw, almost any album you could label experimental to a degree because of the exploration that's taking place. But I suppose as he's really stretching out as a solo artist and composer, he really is experimenting.
A few things I want to point out about the track, Josh. First of all, it's not the first time Les sung about Barrington Hall, as you might remember.
Oh, I remember.
Secondly, does the punch spiked with LSD remind you of something?
A little record from 1995 called Tales from the Punch Bowl, of course, and the track Frizzle Fry, as you were alluding to earlier. Yeah.
So I think the strings are what sets the song apart, and of course the unusual bass that was used for it. But listening to the track again recently, I have to say that Mike D is the unsung hero in this song. What he's doing sounds incredibly complex, but still packed with a ton of melody, and he's serving the song incredibly well. So I think Mike D could very well be the highlight of this track.
That's an interesting point because there is a part I want to play in which he features, and I do wonder if they all had to hold back because everybody gets their chance in a live setting, but in this studio, there's obviously an intent and a structure to be followed. And Matt, you can speak to this because when you're playing a tune, and if you're playing a fairly simple tune, it's not like your mind's wandering and you're bored. But, you're just playing that part, say you're just chugging along on a muted open string, but you're counting because you got to come in to the next part or whatever. But it is interesting that these guys are just playing their parts, I suppose, and not indulging themselves.
In a lot of the studio material, even in bands or contexts where Claypool's jammier sides have come out in a live setting, on the records, there seems to be a real focus on keeping things pretty tight and pretty reined in. Not to say that there aren't embellishments, but not nearly to the degree that you would get in a live setting.
Sure, yeah.
And there's always these little sort of pockets of space, it feels like each musician is given to kind of shine. And that, I think, I know what you're referring to with this song too, that middle part where each instrument kind of gets this little kind of pocket of time to shine, as well as then later supporting the other instruments as they take their solo kind of breaks. And it all flows very kind of seamlessly to me in this song. And it doesn't feel sort of gratuitous or, superfluous. It all kind of flows and fits very well, I think, structurally in the song, because it is a very tight, what did we say, like 4 minutes or 4.5 minutes? It's a pretty tight song. And all of that extra instrumentation, I think, just adds, as you said, Frankie, so much to the atmosphere and the vibe of it.
Yeah, I do want to play a couple parts here. And the first part I'm going to play is from about 111 to 133. And I wanted to play this part because this is where it's early-ish in the tune. And so they're starting to build the layers that, of course, will be embellished later as that comes back around. And this speaks to a lot of what you'd already laid out for us, Matt, but it's fun to hear it now after getting those individual parts.
Just when I thought I'd seen it all, I stumbled round the corner into Barrington Hall. Does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? Does anybody here remember Barrington?
That has that bass note slide. It has the thirds. It has the I don't know if they're putting a little vibrato on the violin and viola, I think. And the one thing we didn't mention is Les's drumming or percussion there. There's that dink, kind of the punch line or kind of that through line throughout, because there could easily be silence there because we know he's a stop-start player. Maybe he just felt like that needed to be there as a through line or a continuation, so it didn't feel herky-jerky. But that, to me, that percussion really stands out because if I'm thinking of like a chamber quartet, you don't normally have those percussive sounds. You have most of those other sounds that we're hearing. I even would incorporate the marimba into that chamber quartet idea, but not the percussion. So it kind of does stand out. It's not a sore thumb, but it certainly sticks out a bit in those moments where it's the only thing playing.
I think this is something that Les has gotten a lot more fond of over time, this approach to percussion on some of his material. I don't know how much of this comes from Stuart Copeland, but it immediately called to mind something like Shadow of a Man, where there's very sparse, very minimal percussion going on.
Yeah.
And then you think of some of the later Tim Alexander material, a lot of the stuff on the Wonka record, even a lot of the more supporting stuff on the Desaturating 7 record, this very kind of sparse auxiliary percussion that's just kind of peppered in throughout as opposed to really providing a driving beat or dominating the track, really. It seems to be something that has popped up a lot more over time in Les's work.
Yeah.
And I misspoke earlier, actually, just to sneak this in. In that clip, at least, Mike Dillon is actually playing the thirds.
Okay.
And Sam Bass is playing the root unison notes with Les. So
Okay.
I may have either misheard when I was listening to it earlier, or maybe they trade off in different parts of the
Okay.
song. I'm not 100% sure. But either way, Mike Dillon bringing tons of flavor with the marimba on the track.
Yeah. The other thing I should point out is you said the word peppered, so you owe Frankie $5.
I'll use sprinkled next time.
There you go. See, that one's fair game.
Sprinkled in.
I do want to move forward to about 2 minutes 25 seconds because this is the Mike D part of the tune, and
I'd like to sample a part two when you're done with that, Josh.
Mike D. This is Mike D's little time to shine here, and he gives us a bit more flavor. I think there's a little more chromatic elements to what he's playing here, and also pay attention for what I call the psycho strings. That's really fun. And I call those psycho strings. And that goes back to something you mentioned, Matt, with the imagery of the narrator wandering around this abandoned building and seeing the ghosts of Barrington Hall past, doing wild things like whipping the walls and, so that sort of thing, right? And then those psycho strings just make me think of the lyric of the, being startled by the urine ferret, whatever that is, peering around a corner and seeing something completely unusual and unsettling. So that idea of conjuring the ghosts of Barrington Hall through this music is certainly, to me, I'm buying it, especially in that section.
It caused me to actually question myself as to whether or not what Sam is doing there is a tritone. And I'm not really sure. It sounds like he's doing something very, very dissonant, obviously. And it doesn't sound exactly like when Les plays He Bows Behind the Bridge. Like when he loves that like kind of squeaky behind the bridge sound effect, like on Jillies and all sorts of stuff.
Oh, sure.
But he might be playing just some, like he might be bowing some combination of notes like that, which is like an octave that's basically one note off. You just get like tons of dissonant energy in that. Not 100% sure, but that's definitely the most dissonant thing probably in the song. And then, as you said, Mike D pulling out some interesting things melodically that are probably a little bit outside of that natural minor box, so to speak.
Yeah. And I think, of course, that provides more dynamic elements to the tune. But it also, it just sounds more natural, if that makes sense, because they're playing in such a box as far as the key goes. You're wondering, when are they going to bust out of this and do the things that they normally do? And that portion of the tune, they start going in that direction. They don't completely overdo it, but they certainly get to indulge themselves a bit.
3 minutes and 40 seconds, please, for what I consider to be the catharsis of the track.
Everything okay over there, Frankie? You've been talking about catharsis a lot. If you need to get something out, if you need to issue a primal scream, just let it rip, buddy.
Sure.
All right, let's blow the roof off of Barrington Hall.
Barrington, does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? Does anybody here remember Barrington? Does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? Any recollection of Barrington at all? Does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? Any recollection of Barrington at all? Any recollection of Barrington? Any recollection of Barrington?
That is a really interesting ending. There's a couple of things I observed, which is Mike moving up in register on the marimba, of course, which will change the dynamic and give it a new urgency, I suppose. The other thing is what the violin and viola and cello are doing, which I'm not sure how to describe it. I'm not well versed, especially in classical music, but that just sounds like a textbook classical music grouping of notes. Da 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 da. But they do it in such a way, of course, it's very compelling and it builds that intensity and does result in some kind of catharsis or release, as Frankie mentioned. But Matt, maybe you can speak more to that musically.
And the strings are very evocative during this part.
Indeed, yeah, the intensity that they bring.
All the layers are sort of just building and building and building upon each other at that point. And Sam is climbing up the scale to some sort of a flourish, like you said, the Barrington, that Les has been coming back to throughout the song. It definitely kind of crescendos and then resolves very kind of neatly in a way that, some tracks don't always do in the Claypool. But yeah, it's you can tell, as you said, Josh, when he's sort of stretching his legs and really kind of exploring different aspects of his creativity on this record. There's lots of points where you can see, maybe on earlier records where there were more times when you could see like, oh, that I could see that on a Primus record, or that's a very Primus sounding part. There's lots of moments, I think, on Purple Onion that sound completely outside of that kind of toolbox or that flavor that he has worked in the past. And what stands out to me is that I think for a newcomer, I would dare say for a newcomer coming into Les Claypool, there may be overall a lot less kind of dissonance and kind of jarring things musically on this record compared to a lot of the deeper Primus stuff. So I always found this a very easy inroad, very accessible and very replayable in a lot of ways, especially the live material with how much it's embellished upon. It's a really cool record, and maybe in terms of the production style, one of the cleaner records that he's made in terms of just the sonics of it. Everything has a very distinct space to it. It doesn't have that sort of analog, warm, rounded off kind of fuzziness that maybe some of his later stuff has a lot. It doesn't have a lot of the reverb, the kind of 90s reverb that he bemoaned on the Sailing the Seas of Cheese reissue and stuff like that you might see on like Punch Bowl or Pork Soda. It's just a very kind of clean, spacious sounding record where even though there's so much going on, you can always hear every single component of it.
If you were going to label any of his tunes easy listening, this would be the one. It's clearly not easy listening. It certainly could be an entryway for somebody who's unfamiliar. And then, of course, you hear the other tunes and you go, well, this sounds nothing like the first one you showed me, Matt. What is going on?
Exactly. Yeah. There's lots of tracks in his discography, I'm sure, that are very singular, and there's nothing else that really sounds like it that he's done before. I would probably count this among those. I can't think of another track that sounds quite exactly like this.
We should talk about the lyrics briefly as well. The structure of the lyrics is interesting with that repetition of the question, does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? And just the name Barrington. Go ahead and drink every time he says it. Good luck. The structure, I noticed something interesting with the structure. And I'm talking about the verses themselves. In the first verse, it's the first line of each stanza that rhymes. They're happy in the night, it gave him quite a fright. The rest of the lines don't have much of a rhyme scheme, if any. And then in the second verse, it's the second line of each of the stanzas that rhymes. As you're gazing at the walls while the room's extremely small. Those are the second lines of the two stanzas in that verse. And then in the third verse, those two stanzas have an A-A-A-B rhyme scheme. They care not wrong from right, they electrocute the night, and it's always quite a sight down at Barrington. They drank up all the wine, some opiate the time, no hands are free from grime here at Barrington. So that he changes rhyme scheme with each verse, which is of interest to me. The chorus, just when I had thought I'd seen it all, stumble around the corner into Barrington Hall. So there's your AA. But just that repetition of Barrington, it's really fun to say, by the way, Barrington Hall. It really does flow. That's not something he coined, of course. It was named Barrington Hall in what, Frankie, the 1930s?
Yeah.
It goes really far back. But it also made me think of, because of some of the sounds that it has in common with another name that we're familiar with, I wonder if Barrington Hall helped create the name Southington Willoughby. I have no idea if it did, but Barrington, Southington, maybe there's something there, but maybe not. But he's certainly in these lyrics. This is what's of interest to me. He's just hinting at the debauchery. He's not out and out saying, Yes, they have these dinners where they spike the punch bowl with LSD and everybody's tripping balls, and they're already naked anyway at the table, eating insects or whatever. From my reading, they would have these themed dinners, which I thought were pretty interesting. He references they're happy in the night, lethargic in the day. So clearly they're mostly active in the nighttime hours. And if you were going to go there in the daytime, not much happening. It gave him quite the fright when Urine Ferret came his way. I still want to know what that is, but
This is the brave work that Primus Tracks is doing.
Yes. My search history, my internet provider, I don't know why they still allow me to access the outside world. That had to be a specific moment because it gave him, Les will often narrate something from his life in the third person. So something happened at Barrington when he was just visiting or playing a gig there in the 80s with Primus. Something about a urine ferret, and he nearly lost his mind in Barrington. So when he's using that third person, it had to be something that happened to him. And of course, there's a chance it was somebody else who had that experience and related it to him. But then it goes back into the first person. Just when I thought I'd seen it all, I stumble around the corner, and he certainly spent a lot of time there. Once again, these oblique references. The folks are full of smiles as you're gazing at the walls, and the pictures draw you into the heart of Barrington Hall. Famously or infamously, I suppose, every wall in that place was painted over and drawn on with murals and socio-political commentary. And some of the stuff I was reading, they were saying we would paint these murals and draw on the walls, and it would turn into philosophical debates and that sort of thing. So if you are dipping into the punch bowl and that LSD is starting to take hold, those walls are going to be quite interesting. They drink up all the wine, some opiate the time. No hands are free from grime at Barrington. I'm sure that place was filthy, by the way. A student-run housing cooperative,
The stairs are rather big while the room's extremely small. Does that sound to you like someone losing their perception about the way things are because of the drugs?
I suppose your perception is being altered because when you're in there, you're probably... drug use obviously was rampant there. I also wonder if that was just commentary on the actual rooms that people slept in, if they were just essentially sleeping in closets and then they had all that communal space. It's a good question. It was a horribly dirty place, drugs everywhere, but I'm sure it was a blast for the bands that were coming in and playing there, as well as the residents of the place. And I loved the phrase, "They care not wrong from right. They're just doing what they do." And they electrocute the night. Of course, the parties there, or just the average nightly experience there, must have been off the charts. This is less, 20 years later, nearly, with the benefit of hindsight. He's a dad at this point, and he's probably thinking, I can't believe I got away with all the crazy shit they were doing there, and that we were doing there when we were playing shows and dip it into the punch bowl and just being insane.
The imagery that comes to mind when he says they electrocute the night, because this is a wellspring of inspiration for Claypool, and we've got two other kind of psychedelic themed references in Frizzle Fry and Tales from the Punch Bowl. I think of light trails that some people see when they're on hallucinogens, if they're looking out at the stars or at the moon and they move their eyes.
Sure.
And they get this big kind of streak of, light in their vision. That's where my mind has gone to with that line, but I mean, it's open enough to be that I'm sure the parties there and the experiences were quite the sight. So
there were a lot of noise complaints as well because of the bands that were playing there at all hours of the night. So I wonder if it's more literal. There was one quote. This is on the Wikipedia page. I had to read this though. This is from a court document from the United States Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit, which is in California. And this is in court documents about Barrington Hall. It says, Barrington Hall's reputation was larger than life, even by California standards. If Berkeley, California was the last bastion of 60s counterculture, Barrington Hall, the city's oldest and largest student housing cooperative, was surely the last rampart. A bit too freewheeling, according to two of Barrington's neighbors. They claim that the co-op's denizens engaged in massive drug law violations, turning the neighborhood into a drug enterprise zone, and Barrington Hall prided itself on fostering alternative lifestyles. Its bizarre and irreverent rituals included nude dinners with themes like Satan's Village Wine Dinner and the Cannibal Wine Dinner, the latter complete with body part-shaped food. These bacchanalian festivals often turned riotous.
I love the language that they're using.
The most satisfying part of reading court cases for me is to read the word choice and the syntax and phrasing. I don't think that court justices get enough credit for their writing skills. They have a way with words. And that just tickled me because of that wording, but also that it's in a court document detailing the many, many violations of law and I suppose good manners that Barrington committed over the years. But speaking of electrocuting the night, of course Primus played there, but other bands that played there included Black Flag, X, the punk band X, NoFX, Op Ivy. I haven't thought about Op Ivy in years.
Wow. Yeah.
Dead Kennedys played there in the 80s as well. So, and I'm sure I'm missing out on dozens of other bands whose names we would recognize that played Barrington at some point. So clearly the punk scene was alive and well at Barrington, and I'm sure Primus fit in, just given how off the wall they were. So once again, Les is just hinting at these things because maybe it would be too on the nose for the irony to be singing about nude cannibalistic themed dinners with this refined music, but just to hint at some of the lengths and depths of depravity that the good people of Barrington were capable of. It's Live Cuts time, and I have something for you all. This is from our pal Gino. I think we finally have a Live Cuts theme. Frankie.
Awesome.
Here's your world premiere of the Primus Tracks Live Cuts jingle. Live Cuts.
A jam vehicle.
Live Cuts. The jam vehicle. Live Cuts.
A jam vehicle.
Live Cuts. A true jam vehicle. Live Cuts.
A jam vehicle.
Live Cuts. The jam vehicle. Live Cuts.
What's going on here? Shards of bone in my anus.
That's incredible. Awesome.
I will very much enjoy playing that every week from here to eternity.
Thank you. That was fantastic.
So that was from our pal Gino. He credits, of course, that was a sample of the drums from Precipitation. Les was on drums for that. Gino added some bass and some drums of his own, as well as the samples of Frankie's voice and my voice, as well as the voices of Tim Sawyer and Adam Gates. Our first live cut today is from Burlington.
This is a premiere. Yeah.
Matt, you may be interested to know that the first performance of Barrington Hall lasted 11 and a half minutes.
I called it, man. I knew that they would American Life the hell out of this song.
Let's hear a little bit of this one. I appreciate how they're building that up. It sounded like it just came from a bunch of disparate pieces, but then it started fitting together. Matt, is that his regular fretted 4-string?
It still sounds fretless to me.
Okay, I couldn't tell.
The classic fretless tone, if we're going by, I was about to make probably an unfair comparison. I think probably the most famous fretless bass tone is probably Jaco Pastorius.
Uh-huh.
And he's very famous for favoring the bridge, the pickup closest to the bridge on his bass, which gives it a very cutting, very distinct sound. A lot of Les's basses feature a similar kind of sound, regardless of whether they're fretted or fretless. So it's a little hard to tell, but it sounds to me like that is a fretless.
they're letting it rip now.
We got some violin there.
Yeah, violin and cello and everything else. The big change for me is the backbeat on the drums. That just changes the entire tune for me. But what were you hearing, Matt?
They're really off the reservation on this one. They're like completely. It sounds a little bit like. I mean, Les usually has a very structured way of acknowledging solos.
Yeah,
and when it's time for you to stop your solo, because of course we have the walk down, of course,
yeah.
right? But there, it felt like a lot of people were kind of soloing all at once, and then it kind of congealed into a little more structure and order there. A lot more dissonance in this cut for sure, and like you said, the backbeat of the drums completely changes the vibe. So they're really exploring the outer limits of the tune itself for sure.
And and the individuals, of course, that were making those noises weren't sticking to any template. They were all over the place. And so that really lends itself to a chaotic scene there. That was a lot of fun to listen to, Frankie. This is not a recording that I've heard before. Switching from the Sandman to the clean mic, very funny there.
Yeah, and I think maybe what was coloring a little bit of my perception of the previous clip is it does sound like the levels are pretty... Yeah, is this a soundboard?
Very, very high quality audience recording.
Okay. Yeah, so it sounds like the levels are a lot different than what you would hear on the record. Like, it sounded like Sam was really high in the mix. And then, like you said, the Sandman versus the clean mic was a huge gap in terms of levels. So, yeah. But it's a really cool... I've never sought out live, or I've never heard live performances of the song because it is so scarce, but I'm curious to kind of go back and see where exactly they go with it.
And speaking of the Sandman and the clean mic and the disparity between them, it reminded me of the studio cut and the way in which Les delivers the vocals, which we didn't discuss. So different from almost any other track, especially in terms of how breathy the lyrics are. Barrington Hall, doing that sort of thing. And to me, that's just taking a big bong rip, and then the Hall is just letting that smoke out, that sort of thing. So, but really that breathiness is something he hasn't, I don't think, ever done before. So he's finding different dynamics in his instrumentation, and his own voice. And that's just hearing that there reminded me of that. Let's go to the Fillmore, Frankie. 2002. Is this New Year's Eve?
Fillmore, yeah, legendary show.
Oh, you got to let it all hang out on New Year's Eve.
It's called Barrington Hall.
Clean. Matt, is that a little bend he's doing, or is he doing a little slide?
He's definitely having a lot of fun with. Yeah, it's definitely a fretless.
Yeah,
now that he's doing kind of a lot of slide ups and he's really having fun with it.
So he's adding a bit more action to that main lick to take. I suppose he's taking up a little more space, but yeah, they're certainly having fun with it. Let's hear a bit more of the body of the tune.
And just when I thought I'd seen it all, I stumbled round the corner into Barrington Hall. Does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? Does anybody here remember Barrington? Does anybody here remember Barrington Hall? Any recollection of Barrington?
So that part's fairly straightforward. I have a feeling as we work our way through this one, which is only 7 minutes and 43 seconds,
I don't mind.
that we're going to open it up a little bit. It's fun to hear violins, violas, and cellos and those sort of instruments shred.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
fun.
I really like what Sam brings to like the tonal palette of a lot of the Claypool stuff. I like the Fungi record. I think that this lineup benefits from some of those other colors in there with the with Mike D and with all the supportive instrumentation. But I really like what that brings to the song. That I assume I think it's a viola. Yeah. Well, he plays viola and cello on this too,
right?
So it's hard to say. But I think viola is his main instrument, but I could be completely wrong on that. There was a time when I would have known, but it has passed me.
Matt, I'll give you the first go round at this. What is your lasting takeaway from this tune? And I'm asking because I was somewhat taken aback that this was one of your first choices to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, each record, I throw out a few options, but I think it's fun to talk about some of the the lesser mined tracks in the discography, things that have songs that have aspects of them that are very singular and very unique. Let alone musically, but in terms of Claypool's career as well. So this has just always been one that really stands out on the record to me. And it's kind of smack right in the middle. It's probably not one that's, it's not going to be a big opener or closer or a zinger, so to speak, in the discography. But as I've said before, there's not really another track that has this kind of atmosphere or execution in his discography. It's very melodic. Like I said, It's got a very haunting kind of atmosphere, and as you said, that plays a little bit into the delivery for me as well. That kind of whispered, the real breathy whispered things. It's all very ghostly, very atmospheric, and it's just one that I find it very easy to listen to as well. It's not not as a criticism of the track, but it isn't. I don't find it super demanding of the listener. It's very, you kind of settle into the vibe and the groove and the atmosphere of it, and you just let it kind of carry through to the end, and it's just a really solid track, I think.
Exactly like you guys mentioned, I think the track stands out on the record because of how melodic, how sophisticated it sounds. The interplay, the interaction between the instruments is absolutely fantastic. Each one gets an opportunity to do something complex, while at the same time maintaining a melody to serve the song. Reading about the place itself, and then hearing the references that we have on previous songs like Frizzle Fry, you would imagine debauchery, of course, but when you hear those lyrics backed by this instrumentation, like it is in this song, they become mysteriously nostalgic, evocative, and there's just something about the song that sounds I wouldn't say eerie. It's more like kind of, a song about days gone by, but it's not precisely sad. It's just nostalgic in a kind of neutral way.
Wistful.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what I was aiming for. Again, the placement on the record is brilliant.
Yeah.
I think Les really hit the nail on the head with the sequencing on this album. So it is definitely a song I look forward to hearing a lot when I play the record. It is a shame that, I mean, that's probably its blessing and its curse. It's really beautiful because of the instrumentation, but at the same time, it doesn't get played because of that.
Perhaps that will change in the future. I can say this, Barrington Hall, you've been tracked. Next time, who wants to go to Dee's Diner?
I do.
Who wants to go down to Dee's?
Me.
Thank goodness somebody does. We'll solve that riddle next time. Primates, thank you all so much for listening. Matt, thank you for joining us, taking the time. Matt is at Ham of Truth 86 on Instagram. You can see his wonderful pedal collection. I will have questions about pedals for you off air.
Always happy to help.
Excellent. Thanks, man. Later days.
Willie Mays.
Any recollection